Patch 13.3 is the biggest change in Set 8 since its launch, as multiple things were getting completely reworked in addition to the usual balance changes. In this video, I'm going to take you through every important change in the newest patch, explain how it affects the meta, and then give you my prediction tier list for the foreseeable future. Hero augments now give you 4 rerolls, separate from the normal augments. This is a massive change as it decreases the variance in games by a ton, and it makes it more important to know what augments are the best ones and to try to force those every game. Make sure to keep up to date with what's good and what's not, and only time will tell if this is a positive change for the game or not, as while it makes sure you get an augment that fits your board, it could make the game very linear and render many hero augments obsolete. The admin at 40% threshold was raised to 66%, which is a nice buff as these choices were previously untakeable. Gadgeting gets a huge buff in this patch, as putting items on Gadgeting units gives you damage amp and damage reduction, quadrupled at 5 Gadgeting. This should make Zoe 3 a very strong carry in the meta, especially after her previous buffs, and it should also help Gadgeting in the early game. Laser Core receives a big rework in this patch. The trait breakpoints are now 3, 5, 7, and 9. The drones are always active, and the cooldown is lowered. However, the damage was lowered to adjust for these changes. Previously, Oxforce units would die after their trait procced, unless they healed. Now they will live on 1 HP and be required to be killed. This is a nice change, both for Oxforce, but also for things like Anima Squad, and things like Get Paid, League of Draven, as they actually receive stacks from these units. Underground's trait breakpoints were also changed. Now it's 3, 4, 5, and 6, which allows you more flexibility in playing Underground during the early and mid game. Vertical Anima Squad was an awful comp last patch, unless you had +1 Anima, so the buff to 5 and 7 are definitely warranted and should help it do better in the late game, which is where it usually fell off pretty hard. Though this comp will continue to struggle unless MF receives some buffs, as she is a bit weak right now. Brawler was slightly buffed at 4 and 6. This is a nice change, as it both helps the Jax comp that has been struggling for a bit, while also making Brawler frontline a little stronger in the mid game. Mascot also receives a very small buff at 4 and 6. This change does essentially nothing, as the only real comps that use mascots are Yuumi reroll, Nasus reroll, and Lulu reroll. 2 of these are carry augment specific, while Yuumi reroll is much better with Star Guardians instead of mascots anyway. Kayle gets a nice damage buff. This should hopefully make her a decent AD item holder, as there have been no reason to play her over Ashe, Draven, or Sivir. Lux gets her mana lowered by 10, which is nice, but she will still probably be the worst early game unit, as her main problem is her targeting and that she misses. Draven has been a great early game holder, and an even better carry in the Supers or Defenders reroll comp. He gets a deceptively big nerf here, losing a bunch of damage to his ult and some tankiness. With the correct items, augments, and 3 stars, Draven often won out, even against cap level 9 boards, but even after these changes, he should still be pretty good. Jinx's mana is lowered by 10, and Fiora gained 5 more armor and MR. These are small but nice changes to 2 rarely used units. Jax's ability now scales with AP, which allows him to use more items well, in addition to actually scaling with the mech trait. The Brawler comp was already on the fringe of viability, so look out for this change, as it will put Jax back on players' radars, though it probably won't be a higher tier comp. Talia was a viable but underwhelming carry on the last patch, and she gets a deceptively large buff to her ultimate here, as she usually builds items like JG, Guardbreaker, and Giant Slayer to amplify her damage. Viego was the best AP carry in the meta, and he gets a slight nerf to compensate for a bug fix and an adjustment to his targeting for his ultimate. Hopefully this should keep him in check, as Viego boards often stabilize too hard in the late game compared to other comps. Janna receives a ton of changes. First, her ultimate was buffed by a bug fix that caused it to barely do damage, but nerfed in general so that she doesn't deal too much damage. Her Tornado stun was decreased at 1 star, and Windy Weather was nerfed. This is definitely a step in the right direction, as Windy Weather was clearly overpowered compared to the others, but there will likely need to be further changes to balance the weathers. Both Ancient Archives were buffed to give gold. This is a great change, as these augments have struggled, especially on 2-1, but the gold should make them much more balanced. Birthday Present no longer gives 1 gold per level up. This nerf was warranted, as the augment gave too much tempo for pushing levels. It'll still be good, but you won't hit econ breakpoints as fast as before. Cluttered Mine now gives 4 tier 1 champions, which is a nice buff, as the augment often struggled to get going, as it was hard to have a full bench while making econ in the early game. March of Progress and Hustlers were two of the best augments in the game, with Clear Mind not being far behind. So it's good to see them getting nerfed here, with their effects only triggering during player combat rounds and not during creep rounds now. Multiple prismatic emblem augments had the item they gave changed. Of these, Brawler, Recon, Spellslinger, and Underground were nerfed, while Prankster, Heart, and Mecha Prime are pretty much power neutral. Galio's carry augment was buffed to do twice the damage as before. This augment was terrible, so hopefully now it will become playable. Gangplank's carry augment was playable last patch, but required the proper setup with a bunch of 3 stars. This buff should make Gangplank reroll quite good with the carry augment, though it might struggle to see play due to the addition of 4 rerolls. Lux's support augment was rebuffed to give more shield to her 2 allies. This augment was great when Talia was good and got nerfed previously, so it will probably be pretty good again with Talia coming back into the meta. Renekton's carry augment was a great under the radar choice last patch, and it receives a sizable buff here. This is a nice change as it likely makes this augment still pickable even with 4 rerolls. Silo's carry augment was one of the best hero augments in the game, so this nerf is nice to see as it limits both his tankiness and damage. Annie's carry augment receives a small damage buff, but importantly, its cooldown was halved. This is a big buff for this augment, which should be quite good in Talia, Soraka, and Zoe boards in this patch. Fiora's carry augment has been subpar since launch. This is a nice buff, but it's probably still worth rerolling past this in the Duelist comp for better options like Into the Night or Spare of the Exiles. Jinx's carry augment gets buffed. This was one of the worst augments in the game last patch, so this buff was definitely necessary, though it probably still won't make her a good carry for this to be picked. Lee Sin's support augment gets a small buff, which is nice for the Jax comp and some of the common super reroll comps in the meta. Malphite's carry augment was also one of the worst augments in the game, so it's nice to see it buffed, though it'll still likely be terrible. Rel's carry augment was seeing good success in the Yuumi Supers comp, but it's nice to see it buffed here to make sure it's good enough to take over rerolling for something better. MF's support augment was egregiously overpowered if picked on 3-2, as it gave way too much gold than you should get in the mid game. The augment now scales over time, starting at 10, which should prevent players from getting a free fast 9 with this augment. Set's support augment was counterintuitive to its purpose on your board, as it gave you a locket when you usually wanted to solo frontline him as a mech. This augment now gives it a Protector's Wow, which should be a much better item for him to use, which is nice to see. Janna's carry augment gets renamed and reworked, as it now gives her 50 AP and makes her ability deal true damage. This is an interesting change that should allow the Spellslinger comps more flexibility in having a secondary carry late game, which is nice to see. Nunu's carry augment now gives him 10 more AP. This isn't a huge change, so don't expect this augment to do too much better after this buff. Now let's take a look at my predictions of the next patch. Here is a rough tier list for last patch on the left side, and my prediction tier list for the upcoming patch changes on the right side. Bel'Veth and Samira received no nerfs in this patch, while a bunch of other strong comps received nerfs. And they were already S tier before, so they remain at the top, while Viego drops down after some nerfs. Gadgeteen Zoe jumps all the way back into S tier after being a flex variant of the Soraka board previously. The comp was already good before, so the buffs should make it incredibly strong. Laser Core is a bit of an unknown after the rework, but Riot's intent has been to nerf it a little while keeping it playable as a good top 4 comp, so it drops down to the A tier. Kai'Sa reroll is one of the highest caps in the game if you manage to 3-star everything, but it struggles hard if you're contested, so it remains in A tier, while Yuumi reroll remains S tier as well after no changes to the comp, though it is heavily reliant on good augments to do well. Talia is back in A tier after her buffs as a consistent top 4 AP comp. Animus God MF squeaks into the bottom of A tier after some buffs, but I would avoid playing this unless I have +1 Anima, a good hero augment, or the ability to start stacking fame quickly in the early game. Duelist Zed and Heart Soraka remain good comps in the meta, but they are not as strong as the comps above them. 4Ace, Draven reroll, and Jax reroll round out the tier list in B tier as playable comps that aren't contested enough to warrant them ranked being in A tier. As usual, this is just an early prediction of the new patch, and the meta will likely see some surprising shifts over the next few days, so make sure to keep your eyes peeled for my in-depth tier list video this weekend for a more accurate tier list. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you want cheat sheets for any of my comp guides, they are available for YouTube members and patrons, and links to those are down in the description. And if you want to get better at TFT, Join the Discord, we got over 9,000 other players there who are hungry to climb. And if you want to get coached by me, the information is over on the Discord server as well. So take care and see you in the next video.